Ready to dive into some serious political intrigue.
Always up for that.
Okay, good. Because today, we're tackling a system that's often misunderstood, the politics of Iran.
Yeah, it's a lot more than just it's a theocracy, end of story, right?
Exactly. And we're using this Wikipedia article to break it all down, especially how religious and democratic ideas actually collide in practice.
It's a fascinating case study. You've got these elements of a theocracy, sure, but then they've got a president, a parliament.
Right. Like, how does that even work?
Well, that's where this term nizam comes in.
Nizam. Okay, I've seen that before. But, like, what's the elevator pitch? What does it actually mean for, say, someone living in Tehran?
Imagine waking up in Iran. You grab the morning paper, and there's a debate raging in the Majlis, their parliament.
Okay, sounds kind of familiar so far.
Right. But then, boom, you turn the page, and there's this article about the Guardian Council, this unelected body, and they're the ones who can basically greenlight or blackball candidates for those very elections.
So wait, hold up. It's not as simple as the religious leaders decide everything.
Not even close. It's this constant interplay. Think of it like you've got the president, right, elected by the people, but then you've got the supreme leader chosen by these religious scholars, the assembly of experts.
Okay, starting to see where this is going.
And the supreme leader. They're considered the ultimate authority above even the president.
Hold on. So even if the president wants something, the supreme leader can just overrule them.
That's the thing, yeah. That's where this whole concept of guardianship of the Islamic jurist kicks in. Or, if you want to get fancy, wilayat afaqi in Arabic.
Guardianship of the Islamic jurist, that's a mouthful. What's the gist?
Basically, it's this idea that Islamic jurists, these scholars of Islamic law, they're entrusted with guiding the nation, especially in the absence of the hidden imam, this messianic figure in Shia Islam.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together.
It's all about where ultimate authority lies. And in Iran, that authority rests with the supreme leader as the interpreter of these Islamic principles.
So it's almost like a system of checks and balances.
Yeah.
But instead of different branches of government, it's religious authority woven right into the political structure.
You got it. And it's this interplay, elected and unelected, secular and religious, that makes it so fascinating and honestly, sometimes confusing for those of us on the outside.
Yeah, no kidding. We've met the supreme leader. But who else holds the reins in this system? We touched on the Guardian Council a bit, but what's their real power play?
They're like the gatekeepers, right? They've got this power to vet candidates for office, make sure they're down with the principles of the Islamic Republic.
So they could, like, disqualify someone they don't like.
Pretty much. It's happened, and that's why there's so much debate about their role, about how much they influence those elections.
Wow. Talk about holding sway. No wonder people are talking. It's fascinating how one body can have that much power. But what about the candidates who do get through? Where do they fit in all this?
Well, you've got these candidates, right? They've finally gotten the nod from the Guardian Council. They're ready to go.
Cleared for takeoff.
Exactly. But suddenly, it's like they've stepped into this whole other arena, right? They're not just dealing with the usual political pressures, but there's this added layer of religious authority, of interpretation.
It's like playing a political game, but with a whole extra rule book nobody told you about.
Kind of, yeah. And understanding this guardianship of the Islamic jurist idea, it's crucial to making sense of, well, pretty much everything.
Speaking of which, I'm kind of curious, where'd this whole concept come from in the first place? Was it just, like, always a part of Iran's political DNA?
That's the thing. It wasn't always there in this form we see today. It's got roots in Shia Islamic thought, sure, but guardianship of the Islamic jurist, as we're talking about it, that really took off in the 20th century.
So someone was pushing for it.
Big time. And that someone was Ayatollah Khomeini. He was really the one who argued that Islamic scholars, they should hold real political power, especially with the hidden imam out of the picture.
So he was instrumental in kind of weaving that into the whole Islamic Republic thing after the revolution.
Totally. It wasn't just about switching out the Shah for, a different leader. It was about redefining how religion and politics connected.
And Khomeini saw guardianship as the answer.
Exactly. The way to make sure those Islamic principles were, like, baked into how Iran was run.
Fascinating. But even within that framework, I got to imagine there's some wiggle room, right? Like how literally these principles get applied in a modern society. That's got to be up for debate.
You're telling me, even among folks who are, like, totally on board with the basic idea of guardianship, there's a whole spectrum.
Hardliners versus more hands-off types.
For sure. Some want a super hands-on approach. Others see religious leaders more as advisors. And then, of course, you've got people both inside and outside Iran who just think the whole concept is...
a non-starter.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, especially when you start thinking about human rights, because this Wikipedia article doesn't shy away from that.
Yeah, and it gets kind of heavy. We're talking political repression, limits on free speech, crackdowns on dissent. There's even this mention of Iran's UN rep basically rejecting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
It's a big deal, no doubt, and it highlights this tension that exists, because Iranian officials, often their counter-argument is that, like, the West got their own problems.
Double standards, they're saying.
Right, and that their own culture, their interpretation of rights, it matters too.
It's a good reminder that on these super complex issues, even if we don't agree, there are usually multiple perspectives out there. But let's shift gears a bit. Talk about how those different viewpoints actually play out on the ground.
You mean like politically?
Exactly. Because Iran's system, it's not monolithic, is it? This Wikipedia article, it mentions these factions, these parties, adds a whole other layer of intrigue, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. You've got your principalists, think more hardline, really sticking to those core Islamic Republic principles.
Got it.
Then there's the reformists. They're the ones pushing for a more open society, more individual freedom, that kind of thing.
Sounds like my kind of people.
And then somewhere in the middle, you've got the pragmatists trying to build bridges, find common ground.
It's like this whole internal tug of war. Even in a system that seems, from the outside, very much top-down, there's this struggle for influence going on. It's that question, right? How much can you really change a system from within when the rules themselves seem stacked against you?
And that's a huge debate within Iran itself. Like, every election, those debates in the modules, even just on the street level.
Because this article mentions the protests, right? 1999, 2009, 2011, even as recent as 2021. It seems like every few years something kicks off, and it's people pushing back against those limitations.
It's about having a voice, right? And a lot of those protests, they start with very real concerns. The economy, social restrictions, corruption.
It's like no matter how tightly you try to control things from the top down, those underlying tensions, they find a way to surface.
And that's the thing about any political system, I think. You can try to design the perfect structure, but the human element, you can't account for everything.
So true. Speaking of complex systems, though, this Wikipedia article also gets into Iran's economy. And, well, it's a whole other beast.
Oh, yeah. It's a case study in itself. I mean, start with the fact that they're sitting on this massive reserve of oil.
Which, in a way, makes them a target.
Right, absolutely. Because that reliance on oil, it means they're vulnerable to global price swings, to sanctions.
And those sanctions have been a constant, haven't they? Decades of economic pressure.
Right.
But it's not just about the oil itself, is it? This article mentions these bonyads. Am I saying that right? Bonyads?
Bonyads, yeah. Think of them like charitable trusts, but with a ton of economic clout.
Wait, so they're involved in business and stuff?
Big time. They control all kinds of assets, operate across different sectors. Originally, the idea was charitable work, but there's a lack of transparency, a lot of potential for, let's just say, influence.
Yeah. Sounds a little murky to me. And then on top of that, there's this whole other entity, SATED.
Ah, yes, SATED. That's a whole other story.
Because this thing's apparently worth billions.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like barely accountable to anyone.
It operates outside of a lot of the usual oversight, yeah, and its connection to the supreme leader. Well, it raises questions, especially with everything we've just talked about regarding religious and political power in Iran.
It's like trying to follow a trail of breadcrumbs in a hurricane. We've got this unique political system with guardianship of the Islamic jurist as its backbone, factions battling it out internally, a history of protests, and now an economic landscape that seems just as complex. Talk about a crash course.
And even then, we're just scratching the surface. But if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that Iran defies easy answers. It's this blend of the ancient and the modern religious authority bumping up against, well, the will of the people. It's messy, it's complicated, but it's definitely never boring.
You said it. So to everyone listening, as you dive deeper into Iran's political scene, remember, it's not just about what's on paper. It's about the people living those realities every day.